Universal have released a ton of new information about their plans to build a theme park in the UK, and we can work out some pretty interesting things from it, like some of the amazing stuff they're doing to boost transport links to and from the site, how they're going to use different bits of the land and how the theme park's going to develop over time, a timescale for the entire project, so when we might see this theme park opening, and even a hint that they might be building the biggest roller coaster in Europe. There's some pretty amazing stuff in here. So in this video, I'll take you through all of the interesting stuff. If you like it, don't forget to like and subscribe, but let's get started. So all of this information comes as part of a public consultation that Universal are doing up until the 3rd of May before they start applying for planning permission or even make a decision about whether or not any of this is going to go ahead. Now, they have sort of stated on documents that this isn't about what rides they're going to build. It isn't talking about what themed areas they're going to do or anything like that. This is more about the kind of what the theme park would look like from the outside, how it would impact the local area, and things like transport and the economy, etc. They do want people to sort of send in their ideas, their concerns, their problems with it and things like that. But again, not to do with the rides in the themed areas, but more to do with the paths, the rail links, things like that. So that's what this public consultation is all about. As I said, it's going to run until the 3rd of May, so people have got until then to submit their questions. There's also 2 meetings planned, so there's one near the site on Saturday, and then there's another one in Bedford on Tuesday, where they've said there's not going to be any new information shared, but they're going to be listening to other people's kind of, the stakeholders, local residents, local business owners, people like that, their concerns about it, things that might affect them applying for planning permission. They have also said in these documents how they're going to be applying for planning permission. They're trying to get this sort of designated as a special construction project, something that the government would be overseeing, and the government has already said that they're kind of interested in supporting that application, which means they would be in charge of granting planning permission rather than it being the local council, which is a good sign. It means kind of it's likely to get fast-tracked a little bit through this. But the documents they've released include a letter to local residents where they kind of outline why they want to build something in Bedfordshire and how people can get in touch. And then also this massive 16-page document, which is really what we're going to be focusing on, which has a lot of information about what their early plans are for this project. So let's get stuck into that. So the first really interesting part of this are the maps that they're showing off. So they've shown that the land that they've bought, they've split up into the lake zone off to the north, around the lake obviously, the core zone, which is where the theme park would be, as well as the west and east gateways that serve as sort of transport links. And they've shown us the phase 1 plan, which is kind of what they would want it to look like when it opens up. And that entire lake zone to the north isn't being used as a theme park. It's there for temporary buildings, so think things like offices and storage and stuff like that. And then a restoration area, which would be kept sort of as a kind of natural area, like a big park, which if you know Universal Studios in Orlando, they've got a lot of natural area, just waterways, lots of plants, lots of places where there's a lot of wild animals. So it's a nice place to walk around, just kind of to serve maybe some of the things that people would be worried about in terms of the environment, but also just to make it a nice place to spend time. Then in that core zone in the south, you've got the theme park area, as well as some of the supporting things for the theme park. And then you've got the hotels and retail, dining, entertainment area, so like City Walk. And then also the car park down to the south. Interestingly, there's 2 transport hubs with 2 train stations connected to them. So one to the west, one to the east. And these transport hubs, if you think of like Orlando Universal Studios, you've got that beginning of City Walk where if you come via car, which is how most people get there, then you all get funneled up some escalators and go through like security and as a place for information for guests. It looks like there's going to be kind of 2 of those for this, one to the west and one to the east, which would obviously be great at kind of managing crowds and things like that if you've got 2 separate ways to get into the resort. Then they've also given us a master plan, which is kind of how this might progress over the years, where the car park down to the south has been turned into more theme park area, so it's expanded into the car park, which is pretty standard, like that does tend to happen a lot with theme parks. And the north area, the lake zone, is mixed use and is a bit off to the west as well. So you can think maybe there'd be extra hotels or maybe even a second gate, something like Islands of Adventure. They could build an entire new theme park up there if they wanted to, maybe if the first one was successful. Then the next page is super interesting. It talks about their key design principles, so how they want the park to look, and they're saying, they care about landscaping around the perimeter of the park especially, so it looks nice from outside. They try and keep the skyline to below kind of 30 meters with something sticking out a bit taller. And then they say the highest occupiable floor of any building, so I'd assume a hotel, would be 75 meters. But the highest of any component would be 115 meters. Now, they've said that the hotels wouldn't be taller than 75 meters, so that means a ride. 150 meters is super tall. That's 377 feet. If that was, say, a roller coaster, that would be the 4th tallest roller coaster in the world. 5th tallest after Falcon's Flight opens in Six Flags Qiddiya. But still, that's insanely tall for a ride. Now, this isn't saying they would definitely build a ride that tall, and it could be something else like a drop tower or an observation tower. But whatever it is, that would be a huge ride, and it means they could build something that high. In the UK, traditionally, it's been quite hard for theme parks to build things that are tall. Alton Towers famously can't build above their tree line. Fort Park managed to build Stealth that was over 200 feet tall, but then had to promise not to build anything that tall again for 20 years. And now they've just been able to build Hyperia, which is a new roller coaster. And even that's still only sort of 230 something feet tall. So it's nowhere near the same league as something that would be 377 feet. That would be taller than like Millennium Force at Cedar Point, taller than Fury 325. Universal have built big rides before. You have some drop towers in Islands of Adventure. There's a hypercoaster over in Universal Studios Japan. So they do have some big roller coasters, but nothing on that scale. It would be super exciting if they built something like this, if they had the tallest roller coaster in Europe. Bit of a kick in the teeth to Fort Park, who are, excited about having the tallest roller coaster in the UK. But still, it would be absolutely amazing. Now, it's important to say here, I don't want to get carried away. It's not saying they would definitely build the tallest roller coaster in Europe. It's just that they could, and that's really exciting. It seems they're being very ambitious with what they're asking for in terms of planning permission. Now, it could be that when it goes through the whole process, they end up saying, okay, you can't do that. You can't build that tall. We're going to set a different limit. But this is what they're asking for. So at least in their plans, they've got the idea that, yeah, maybe we could build a ride that tall. Now, later on in that page, it also talks about the idea that they would have, other buildings would maybe only go up to 30 meters, like the rail stations, 20 meters for transportation hubs. And they would really try to focus on keeping the restoration areas as natural as possible with very limited development in them, which would be great. And they also say that all of the kind of back of house buildings, so the stuff that supports a theme park, would be around the edge. So probably from outside the park, that's more likely what you're going to be seeing rather than anything else. Now, in the rest of this document, they talk about all of the kind of other things, just describing what the Universal theme parks are like and what City Walk areas are like, just, I suppose, for people who are worried about this development but who don't know what a Universal Studios looks like. There's an interesting focus on City Walk where it says things like they would have themed restaurants like the Toothsome Chocolate Emporium that they have in Orlando. And they also talk about the fact that there would be a range of hotel and other accommodations, or they say there could be. Now, that's interesting that it sounds like they're talking about more than one hotel. Not every Universal Studios park has its own hotel. Universal Hollywood has some hotels nearby, but none that are actually owned by Universal. So that's kind of interesting that they are definitely planning on building some hotel stuff. And it does say a range of other accommodations. And I'm not entirely sure what that could mean. Does that mean like hostel style accommodation? Maybe camping? Because obviously that's quite a big deal in Europe. That would be interesting. And it'll do say they're aware that lots of people would be staying in other areas like Bedford. So they're kind of trying to say, hey, other local hotels would benefit from this. Because if it's like any other theme park, chances are the on-site hotel would be quite expensive. And then maybe the theme parks elsewhere in local towns, in local cities, would be a lot cheaper to stay at, so lots of people would choose to do that instead. It does also say there that they're considering other mixed-use development, so things like conference centers, exhibition spaces. It would be cool to have something like the NEC, but next to a theme park, like how, Disneyland in California has the Anaheim Exhibition Center next to it. So it's quite fun when people get to go to conferences there, but also get to go to a theme park. Personally, I'd love that. I think that'd be pretty great. There's then some information about how they'd be a good neighbor to local communities, how they'd educate people, train staff up in new skills, give people new careers and stuff, and also just how it would be good for the local environment. Obviously, they'd care about water resources and air quality and stuff. Then there's a section on transport that I think think is super interesting. So they say that they think 35 to 40% of visitors would travel to them by train, and they'd actually have 2 train stations built for this park, one to the west and one to the east. And specifically, they are talking about the fact that it includes East-West Rail, which connects Oxford to Cambridge, which would be amazing for me because it means I could get a train from Norwich to Cambridge and then go straight there without having to go via London. Like, that would be absolutely huge. They say 10% of people would drive, with 25% as passengers. So that means 35% of people coming by car. Maybe sounds a little bit low, but if the train links are good enough and affordable enough, then I think that could be reasonable. And it would be nice if not everybody had to go via car. There's a really interesting graph on this page that shows how it would try to kind of avoid peak times, because people would get there in the morning, which admittedly would probably hit peak times, but then they're saying people would be leaving later than rush hour. Now, this is a really interesting kind of note, because anyone who's driven to Thorpe Park will know it's an absolute nightmare when that park shuts at like 5, 6 p.m, which it normally does, because then you're kicked out onto the M25 at rush hour, and it can take like an extra hour and a half to get home, which absolutely sucks. I hate getting stuck on the M25 when you leave Thorpe Park. This graph is showing that people will be leaving the resort at around 8 or 9 p.m. Now, that's awesome, because that means it's going to be open till 8 or 9 p.m, which a lot of UK theme parks aren't, and it would mean that you'd be missing that rush hour. I've never really understood why Thorpe Park doesn't open later. I think it would be amazing for that kind of traffic management, as well as giving you more time to enjoy the rides. And it's nice to see that that's kind of the approach that Universal seem to be taking, that, yeah, admittedly, it will open 9 or 10 a.m, so you might hit traffic on the way in, or maybe you'll be coming a bit later. But when you're leaving, it'll be a lot later in the day, so that'd be really good. They go into more detail about the train stations that they'd be building. So there would be an East-West rail station and the Wixham's rail station. And they're talking about, as part of this project, they would be building that Wixham's rail station. And it seems like Network Rail are going to be replacing some of the level crossings and improving some of the train stations in the area. And they would also want to build dedicated direct slip roads from the A421 to accommodate about 85% of the road traffic. Again, this would be huge. If you're used to driving to UK theme parks, you'll know driving to Alton Towers, you've got to go around the JCB factory and then through some tiny little villages. If you're going to Thorpe Park, you drive through some really residential areas. It's not ideal to get to a big theme park when you're sitting in big queues in the middle of a residential area, and it must be horrible for the residents. This seems like they're going to solve that by having a dedicated slip road off a major road, so you're not driving through anyone else's kind of, commercial areas, residential areas, anything like that. You're just going straight from the main road into the resort, which would be absolutely amazing. Then there's some more talk about sustainability and how they try to save energy and things like that. It's a little bit vague, but they talk about other things that they've done and local charities, etc. And then they talk about construction. And this is where we get our first real idea of a time frame for this. So they say at this early stage, without having a final design for the theme park and resort, including rides and attractions, we don't know how long construction would take, but expect it would be about 5 to 6 years. Now, assuming that they spend 2024 getting planning permission, so they've got this consultation now ending in May, and then they'd have to actually create the planning permission documents, apply for it and get it agreed, even if it's fast-tracked by the government. That's probably going to take until, maybe early next year at the earliest. It takes a while, especially if they want to be building train stations and roads and stuff, so they've got to work with all of those different agencies. But assuming construction started next year, which I think is probably a bit optimistic, but it's possible, 5 to 6 years would mean this park would be opening in 2030 or 2031. That might feel like a long way away, but bear in mind when Epic Universe was first announced and construction started there, that felt like ages away, and now it's opening next year. I think it's kind of rushed up on us a little bit. This isn't too long to wait. For something this major, the idea that we could be hopping on rides at Universal Studios Great Britain in 2030 or 2031 is super exciting to me. And obviously this channel will keep going to keep giving you updates every step of the way along there. That's 5 years of content. I need to keep you entertained until this theme park opens, and then hopefully beyond too. The document ends with some information on how people can get in touch, and it's worth noting, you don't need to get in touch if you just want to say like, I want a Harry Potter ride, or I want Lord of the Rings, or something like that. They're not asking for information about kind of what you want to see inside the parks. They're just wanting to know about concerns people have, that might relate to the planning permission, to the paths, the transport, all of that kind of thing, what the park will look like from outside. So that's what this is for. Don't just like spam them with you saying that you want to see, a Vin Diesel ride or something like that. On this site, obviously on this channel, I'll be releasing videos every month, giving you updates whenever there's some new news, and there might be some extra little videos coming out over the next few weeks about kind of what sort of rides we'd like to see, what sort of lands we'd like to see, what sort of things we're expecting. So make sure you subscribe, turn your notifications on, ready for them, and I'll see you for the next one. Goodbye.